Welcome to the interview on France24. Joining us today is Professor Jeffrey Sachs. He is the director of the Earth Institute here at Columbia University and also special advisor to two Secretary Generals now on the Millennium Development Goals, as well as the author of the best-selling book, End of Poverty. We're here. It's a big deal. We have 5 years left now to get these ambitious poverty reduction targets met. It's kind of failing, isn't it?
It's not failing. We're making progress, and pretty widespread progress, but not fast enough. So the whole key to this year's summit is to speed up, especially the phrase we're using is scale up. A lot of things work. We can see there's been a great success in this place or that place, in this activity or that, but these successes are not reaching all those who need it yet. So we have to scale up the successes.
But the whole idea of the Millennium Development Goals, you know, have 8 goals: cutting people the number of living on a dollar a day by half, helping maternal health, primary education. These whole ideas, they were easy ideas to meet, that there would be set targets, and like a business, you would meet those targets. What went wrong in terms of the commitment to these goals? Can we blame the countries? Do we blame the West for not giving enough money? Who?
I think your description is exactly right, but the world doesn't run like a business. It doesn't run on the efficiency, on the timetable that it says, and especially intergovernmental processes. In other words, when you need lots of governments to work together, things drag, things fall behind, countries are distracted, politicians are distracted. I put most of the responsibility on the side of the rich countries for falling short. The United States, my own country, has just not stepped up the way it needed to. It put its efforts into war, unfortunately, in my opinion, rather than into peaceful, sustainable development. This was a huge mistake, I believe, from America's own security, but also for achieving the Millennium Development Goals.
And the Obama administration is doing even less than the Bush administration, correct?
The Obama administration will see whether they do something. President Obama promised at last year's General Assembly that he would come forward with a globally agreed plan this year, but we've not heard much from the administration. They've not embraced this agenda in a public way during this past year. President Obama's coming. I'm going to be listening keenly to what he says, but we need a lot more from the United States. Frankly, for the big donor countries, so-called, the United States, France, Germany, Canada, Italy, Japan, they're not doing their job. Of the major donors, only the United Kingdom in this difficult economic environment has said, we're charging ahead, we're going to meet the 0.7 target. They cut a lot of budget, but they ring-fenced the development assistance, and that's what the rest of our country should do.
What you're saying is the 0.7% of gross national income that is sort of the benchmark for giving by rich countries for development assistance support. Now, that target has not been met, and a lot of people are refusing to sign on to that target. But
well, let me say, all countries are agreeing to sign on, but then they sign, but they don't do it. And that's the frustration. So words are cheap. It's the actions that we need.
Now, of course, commitment from the West, but we also have seen in the last 5 to 10 years, a huge amount of debt relief. We have seen a lot of investment, especially in Africa, and we've also seen tremendous amounts of economic growth. I mean, if you look at Africa, for example, the continent grows at 6 to 8% a year. So the economic growth is there. Why aren't these countries then delivering to their poorest citizens?
Oh, there's a lot of progress, but remember Africa's situation 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the African economies had been a full generation of collapse, declining GNPs, already the poorest in the world. There were AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis pandemics running completely out of control. Most people wrote off the continent as absolutely hopeless. People do not write off Africa as hopeless right now. Indeed, just as you say, there's a lot of investment coming in, especially in mining and in agriculture and in some financial services as well. So people are seeing opportunities there. The growth rate has gone up significantly, as you say. Money is being translated into getting children in school and into building clinics. But these are very poor countries. My job as a financial specialist is to look at what these countries can afford on their own and ask what more has to be brought in from the outside so that the combination is sufficient. And the basic point is that these Millennium Development Goals have to be a deal, a package. We call it a global compact, because what the countries have in their own budgets, even when they really try to do it just right, they don't have enough actually even to put on a basic primary health system. That's where we come in from the outside. But where are we? We made promises in 2002, in 2005, in 2009. They haven't been fulfilled. We have to fulfill what we say. Then the Millennium Development Goals can really be achieved on time.
There's also a leadership question, isn't there? I mean, I think you once wrote that Africa has poor leadership because Africa is poor. Well, it seems to a lot of outsiders that as much aid as you put in to Africa, the results aren't always what's expected. The African leadership, there is corruption. There's a survey out in the last 24 hours or so, Transparency International, saying the MDGs are least delivered in the most corrupt countries. So there is a bargain that needs to be made here about governance too, right?
I think the key on corruption and all the rest, since, boy, do we have corruption in the United States and in Europe also, the key is creating clear systems. So if you put in resources, you know where they go, how they go, you can monitor it. If you just give money on the basis of trust, forget it. On both sides, by the way. So this has to be run in a proper business-like way with milestones, with monitoring, with audits and so forth. This has to be done in a very rigorous manner to work, but it can be done that way.
Is there a problem, though, with the MDGs becoming like a bureaucracy, in a way, a self-fulfilling one that perhaps wants to go on beyond 2015?
I'll tell you, the interesting thing that I've seen is the world has such a hard time agreeing on absolutely anything, and most UN goals that are stated are forgotten the next day. It's amazing. We're 10 years on, and these goals are not only not forgotten, which most of the time they would have been, but they're actually embraced, and they're part of the structures of government and strategy in the poorest countries. I was just with about 15 heads of state in Africa, in Kigali, Rwanda, talking around the table about the Millennium Development Goals. They're using this as their organizing principles for how to think about what their development should be. And I find this extremely gratifying. It's actually putting the emphasis on the important things.
Now, obviously, there's going to be a lot of leaders sitting in rooms and making speeches, but you travel around the world. You actually see the implementation of these MDGs, not just as a concept. What does it mean on the ground for people when they get access to water for the first time or a primary education? Just how revolutionary have they been?
When you've seen, as I have so many times, a child dying of malaria in front of you, first, you never forget it, and second, you are absolutely committed to make sure that the medicines are there when they need to be, the bed net is there to protect the child. And so you work overtime as much as you can to make sure that we have the systems to distribute the medicines, the bed nets, the antiretroviral medicines, the things that keep people alive, the high-yield seeds that can feed hundreds of millions of people. And I see on the ground that when we're clever and serious about this, those life-saving commodities and medicines reach the people and make all the difference. And there's nothing more heartening than to see a village that was in disarray, on the edge of violence or trapped in violence, suddenly making its way forward because the farmers are getting good yields. The children are healthy and in school. They're surviving. People are sleeping under anti-malaria bed nets. And you see this before your eyes and you know this is real. This is the way out of extreme poverty. It's also the way out of global conflict. Because where are we fighting right now? In Afghanistan, in Yemen, in Somalia. These are among the poorest places of the world. The military will never solve the problems in these countries, but development can. And when you see it with your own eyes, you know that's the way forward. Let's do less with our troops and a lot more with our doctors and our engineers and our hydrologists to help people make their way in the world, and that will be the way to peace also.
There is a bit of a commitment gap, isn't there? Because at the moment, we're recovering from a very bad recession. Here in the United States, unemployment is very high. Pensions aren't being met. What would you say to the global citizen who is worried about their own domestic life, their own country, about these poor countries who have had tremendous struggles and yet seem so far away? Why should we really care for the next 5 years, and why is it so important to hit these numbers?
To Americans, I would say we're spending $100 billion this year in Afghanistan. and it's not leading anywhere. And we're spending $10 billion for 800 million people in Africa, and that's not the right ratio. We're spending $800 billion on the military and $30 billion on development, roughly 1/25th of what we're spending on the military. So what I'd say to Americans is our foreign policy is completely out of balance, and we cannot solve the problems of our own national security through military approaches when people are hungry, when climate change is leading to drought, famine, migration that leads to conflict, and then we go in and we're surprised to find that there's terrorism taking hold in these places. I see these places as they're falling into violence. I come back to Washington and I said, as I did 5 years ago, Yemen, that's a crisis. Of course, Washington does nothing. 5 years on, then they're saying, oh my God, there's al-Qaeda in Yemen, we have to fight. We can't go on like this, reacting to the symptoms when the deep causes are poverty and hunger and water stress. And we are spending so much on the military. If we divert just a small part of that to peaceful development, we're going to get much more security. We're going to achieve our own national goals much more effectively.
Well, we've come a long way, but obviously still a long way to go. Professor Sachs, thank you very much for joining us. That's it for the interview here on France 24. Stay tuned for more news.